You've been running from yourself your entire life, haven't you? Not from your fears, not from your failures, but from the parts of yourself that you've deemed unacceptable, unworthy, unseeable. You've crafted this beautiful, socially acceptable version of who you are, polished it until it gleams, presented it to the world like a masterpiece. But late at night, when the applause dies down and the masks come off, you feel that gnawing emptiness, that sense that something fundamental is missing. What you're missing isn't out there in the world waiting to be discovered. What you're missing is the very parts of yourself you've been desperately trying to escape. Nietzsche understood this profound human tragedy better than most. He saw how we create these false selves, these personas that we mistake for our true identity, while simultaneously rejecting and suppressing everything that doesn't fit our idealized self-image. We become our own greatest enemy, our own most ruthless critic, our own prison warden. But here's what Nietzsche knew that most people never realize. The path to authentic selfhood doesn't run around your darkness, it runs straight through it. You cannot become who you truly are until you meet who you've been hiding from yourself. Think about the last time you felt genuine rage, not the polite irritation you allow yourself to express, but that primal, consuming fury that made you want to destroy something. What did you do with it? You probably swallowed it, didn't you? Told yourself that good people don't feel such things, that civilized humans control their impulses, that you're better than that. But that rage didn't disappear. It went into your shadow, that psychological repository of everything you've rejected about yourself, and there it sits, growing stronger, more distorted, more destructive with each passing day. Carl Jung, building on insights that Nietzsche pioneered, called this rejected part of the psyche the shadow. It's not evil, though we often experience it that way. It's simply the collection of all the qualities, impulses, desires, and capacities that we've decided are incompatible with our conscious self-image. The shadow contains not just your capacity for cruelty, but also your capacity for authentic power. Not just your selfishness, but also your healthy boundaries. Not just your sexual desires, but also your creative fire. Not just your anger, but also your ability to say no to those who would diminish you. You see, when you reject parts of yourself, you don't just lose access to the negative qualities you're trying to avoid. You lose access to the energy and authenticity those qualities contain. Your capacity for healthy aggression gets buried along with your destructive impulses. Your ability to be genuinely independent gets suppressed along with your antisocial tendencies. Your creative wildness gets stifled along with your chaotic urges. You become a person of half measures, half truths, half life. Nietzsche called this the creation of the herd animal. The person so concerned with social acceptance and moral conformity that they sacrifice their individual will and authentic nature. These people, he observed, live lives of quiet desperation, never quite knowing why they feel so empty, despite following all the rules, meeting all the expectations, being everything they thought they should be. They've become strangers to themselves, and in doing so, have lost access to their own power, their own creativity, their own capacity for genuine relationship. But here's where it gets interesting. The shadow doesn't just contain what you've personally rejected. It also contains what your family rejected, what your culture rejected, what your generation rejected. Jung called this the collective shadow, and it's why certain qualities feel so terrifying to claim, even when they might serve you. You're not just fighting your own resistance, you're fighting generations of conditioning that tells you these aspects of humanity are unacceptable. Think about your relationship with power. Can you claim it directly, or do you find yourself manipulating from the shadows? Can you state your needs clearly, or do you drop hints and hope others will guess? Can you express anger cleanly, or does it leak out in passive aggression and resentment? These distortions happen because you've never integrated your shadow's gifts. You've never learned to channel your natural aggression into healthy assertiveness, your natural selfishness into appropriate self-care, your natural darkness into depth and complexity. The cost of this shadow rejection is enormous. You project onto others the very qualities you refuse to see in yourself. You become magnetically attracted to people who express your shadow qualities, then find yourself in toxic relationships wondering why you chose someone so cruel, so selfish, so manipulative. What you don't realize is that you chose them because they're living out the parts of yourself you've disowned. They're your shadow walking around in the world, and until you reclaim those qualities consciously, you'll continue to be unconsciously drawn to people who embody them destructively. This is why Nietzsche emphasized the importance of becoming who you are. He wasn't talking about discovering some predetermined essence. He was talking about the courageous act of integration, of reclaiming all the parts of yourself you've scattered to the winds in your attempt to be acceptable. He understood that authenticity requires you to face what you've been running from, to dialogue with what you've been demonizing, to integrate what you've been projecting onto others. The journey to meet your shadow isn't comfortable. It requires you to acknowledge that you're capable of the very behaviors you judge most harshly in others. It demands that you own your capacity for selfishness, cruelty, manipulation, destruction. But here's what most people miss. Owning these capacities doesn't mean acting on them unconsciously. It means bringing them into consciousness where they can be directed, channeled, transformed into something life-serving rather than life-destroying. When you integrate your capacity for cruelty, you develop the ability to cut through illusion and speak difficult truths. When you integrate your selfishness, you develop healthy boundaries and self-advocacy. When you integrate your manipulative tendencies, you develop strategic thinking and influence. When you integrate your destructive impulses, you develop the courage to tear down what no longer serves you. The shadow contains not just your demons, but your dormant powers. Nietzsche wrote, "What does not kill me makes me stronger," but he could have just as easily said, "What I do not integrate controls me." Your unintegrated shadow doesn't disappear because you ignore it. It operates from the unconscious, sabotaging your relationships, your career, your self-esteem in ways you can't even see. It leaks out in your dreams, your slips of the tongue, your inexplicable attractions and aversions. It runs your life from behind the scenes while you pretend to be in control. But when you turn toward your shadow with curiosity rather than judgment, when you begin to dialogue with these rejected parts of yourself, something remarkable happens. You start to feel more alive, more authentic, more integrated. You stop being at war with yourself. You stop exhausting yourself trying to maintain a false image of perfection. You begin to access reserves of energy and creativity you didn't know you possessed. This is what Jung meant by individuation, the process of becoming a whole person rather than a partial person. It's what Nietzsche meant by becoming the Übermensch, the person who has transcended conventional morality, not by becoming amoral, but by creating their own values from a place of integration rather than rejection. It's the difference between being a victim of your unconscious patterns and being the conscious author of your own life. You cannot love authentically until you've integrated your capacity for hatred. You cannot be genuinely compassionate until you've owned your capacity for cruelty. You cannot access real strength until you've acknowledged your weaknesses. You cannot be truly moral until you've faced your capacity for immorality. The light you're trying so hard to embody cannot shine brightly until you've made peace with your darkness. The process of shadow integration isn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing dance between acceptance and transformation, between acknowledging what is and consciously choosing what becomes. Every time you catch yourself judging someone else harshly, pause and ask, what part of myself am I seeing reflected here? Every time you feel inexplicably triggered by someone's behavior, investigate, what disowned aspect of my personality is being activated? These moments of projection are gifts, pointing you directly toward the parts of yourself that need integration. Let's talk about the shame that keeps your shadow buried. Shame isn't just an emotion, it's a prison guard. It stands at the entrance to your unconscious, whispering threats about what will happen if you dare to look at what you've hidden away. If you acknowledge your anger, you'll become an abuser. If you own your selfishness, you'll become a narcissist. If you admit your capacity for manipulation, you'll become a sociopath. But shame lies. These aren't the only options. Integration offers a third path, conscious ownership without unconscious acting out. When you integrate your anger consciously, you don't become an abuser. You become someone who can set boundaries, defend the vulnerable, and fight for what matters. When you integrate your selfishness consciously, you don't become a narcissist. You become someone who practices healthy self-care and teaches others to do the same. When you integrate your manipulative tendencies consciously, you don't become a sociopath. You become someone who understands influence and can use it ethically. Nietzsche understood that most people live in what he called slave morality, a system of values that glorifies weakness, victimhood, and self-denial while demonizing strength, power, and self-assertion. This moral framework keeps you trapped in shadow rejection because it makes you afraid of your own power. It tells you that good people are selfless, that strong people are dangerous, that angry people are wrong. But Nietzsche saw through this deception. He recognized that these moral systems often serve to keep the powerful in power by convincing everyone else to reject their own strength. Your shadow contains not just your personal rejected qualities, but also the qualities that your culture has taught you to fear and suppress. If you grew up in a family that valued compliance over authenticity, your shadow contains your rebellious spirit. If you were raised in an environment that prized emotional control over emotional expression, your shadow holds your full range of feelings. If you were taught that wanting things for yourself was selfish, your shadow guards your healthy desires and ambitions. This is why shadow work is not just personal healing. It's an act of cultural rebellion. When you reclaim your disowned power, you're not just healing yourself, you're breaking generational patterns of self-betrayal. You're refusing to pass on the splits and rejections that were passed to you. You're choosing integration over fragmentation, wholeness over partial living, authenticity over acceptable performance. The fear of meeting your shadow runs deeper than personal shame. It's connected to the terror of standing out, of being different, of challenging the collective agreements about what makes someone good or acceptable. Your shadow contains not just your individual rejected qualities, but your capacity to think for yourself, to question authority, to live by your own values rather than inherited ones. No wonder you've been afraid to look. Your shadow threatens not just your self-image, but your belonging to the group. But here's what Nietzsche knew about belonging. The kind of belonging that requires you to reject parts of yourself isn't real belonging at all. It's conditional acceptance based on performance, and it will never satisfy your deepest hunger for connection. Real belonging happens when you show up as your whole self and find others who can receive you fully. This requires you to risk the false belonging of conditional acceptance for the possibility of true intimacy. Your relationships will transform as you integrate your shadow. You'll stop being attracted to people who act out your disowned qualities destructively, and you'll start being drawn to people who have done their own integration work. You'll stop trying to fix or change others because you'll be too busy taking responsibility for your own wholeness. You'll stop being triggered by behaviors that remind you of your own rejected aspects because you'll have made peace with those aspects in yourself. The creative implications of shadow integration are profound. How much of your creative energy have you spent suppressing parts of yourself? How much mental and emotional bandwidth have you used maintaining your false self-image? When you stop fighting against your shadow, all that energy becomes available for creation, for growth, for expressing your authentic gifts in the world. Your art becomes more honest, your relationships more genuine, your work more aligned with your true nature. Nietzsche wrote about the eternal recurrence, the idea that if you had to live your exact same life over and over again for eternity, would you choose it? Most people would say no, because they're living partial lives, rejecting so much of themselves that their existence feels hollow and unfulfilling. But when you integrate your shadow, when you reclaim all the parts of yourself you've scattered and denied, your life becomes worth living eternally because it becomes authentically yours. This is the ultimate promise of shadow work, not perfection, but integration, not becoming someone else, but becoming fully yourself. Not eliminating your darkness, but learning to dance with it consciously. Not transcending your humanity, but embracing it completely. You are not here to be a sanitized version of a human being. You are here to be human in all its complexity, beauty, and yes, darkness. So here's your invitation. Stop running from the parts of yourself that make you uncomfortable. Start getting curious about what you judge most harshly in others, because that judgment is a roadmap to your own disowned qualities. Begin to ask yourself not, how can I be better, but how can I be more whole? Start treating your shadow as a source of information rather than a source of shame. Begin the radical act of self-acceptance that includes all of who you are, not just the parts that look good in the light. Remember, you won't find yourself by becoming someone else's idea of who you should be. You won't find yourself by perfecting your image or eliminating your flaws. You'll find yourself by turning toward what you've been turning away from, by integrating what you've been rejecting, by making peace with the fullness of who you are. Your shadow isn't your enemy. It's the key to your freedom, your authenticity, your power. But first, you have to be brave enough to look it in the eye and say, "Hello, I'm ready to meet you now." The person you become on the other side of that meeting, that's who you've been searching for all along. But let's be honest about what this journey actually looks like, Because shadow integration isn't a pretty linear process. It's messy, uncomfortable, and often deeply disorienting. There will be moments when you realize that the person you thought you were is largely a construction, a collection of adaptations and defenses masquerading as personality. There will be days when you feel like you're losing your mind because everything you believed about yourself is being challenged. This disorientation isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're doing something real. Nietzsche called this process the great health, not because it feels good, but because it leads to a vitality and authenticity that transcends conventional notions of psychological comfort. He understood that most people choose the familiar suffering of living a partial life over the temporary discomfort of becoming whole. They'd rather stay safely miserable than risk the uncertainty of transformation. But you're not most people, or you wouldn't be here, listening to these words, feeling their resonance in the parts of yourself you've kept hidden. Consider the exhaustion you've been carrying. How much energy does it take to maintain your false self? How much mental bandwidth do you use monitoring your responses, editing your reactions, suppressing your authentic impulses? How tired are you from being vigilant about which parts of yourself you can show and which parts you must hide? This exhaustion isn't just personal, it's epidemic. Millions of people are walking around half alive, exhausted by the effort of being someone they're not, wondering why life feels so difficult when they're doing everything right. Your shadow knows things your conscious mind has forgotten. It remembers what you wanted before you learned to want what was expected of you. It holds your original dreams before they were edited by practical considerations and social pressures. It contains your authentic preferences before they were shaped by the need to fit in. It guards your real opinions before they were moderated by the fear of judgment. In reclaiming your shadow, you're not just integrating your darkness, you're reclaiming your original nature. This is why children are so fascinating and terrifying to adults. They haven't yet learned to split themselves, to reject parts of their nature in service of social acceptance. They express their full range of emotions without shame, state their needs directly without apology, love fiercely without reservation, and rage completely without pretense. Adults often respond to this wholeness with either nostalgia or discomfort, recognizing in children the integration they've lost, the authenticity they've traded for approval. The tragedy isn't that you've grown up, it's that you've grown apart from yourself. You've learned to see your natural impulses as problems to be solved rather than information to be integrated. You've been taught to fear your own intensity, to doubt your own perceptions, to second-guess your own instincts. You've become an expert at self-betrayal, abandoning yourself at the first sign of social pressure or potential conflict. But your shadow remembers. It remembers who you were before you learned to be afraid of yourself. It holds the blueprint of your authentic nature, the original code that got buried under layers of conditioning and adaptation. This is why shadow work often feels like coming home to yourself rather than becoming someone new. You're not creating a different person. You're reclaiming the person you always were underneath all the performance and protection. The spiritual implications of this work are profound. Most spiritual traditions talk about transcending the ego, rising above human nature, becoming something other than what you are. But Nietzsche saw this as another form of self-rejection, another way of splitting off from the fullness of human experience. True transcendence, he suggested, comes not from rising above your humanity, but from embracing it so completely that you transform it from within. You don't become superhuman by rejecting your human nature. You become superhuman by integrating it so thoroughly that you transform what it means to be human. This is the difference between spiritual bypassing and genuine spiritual development. Spiritual bypassing uses spiritual concepts and practices to avoid dealing with psychological material, to rise above difficult emotions rather than work through them. Genuine spiritual development includes the psychological work of integration as part of the path. You cannot transcend what you haven't first embraced. You cannot rise above what you haven't first made peace with. True spirituality includes the body, the emotions, the shadow, all of it. Your relationships become laboratories for this integration work. Every trigger is information. Every projection is a gift pointing you toward what needs to be reclaimed. Every conflict is an opportunity to practice conscious response rather than unconscious reaction. When someone pushes your buttons, instead of focusing on changing them, you get curious about what button is being pushed and why it's there. You start to see your reactions as doorways into your own unconscious, rather than evidence of other people's wrongness. This shift in perspective is revolutionary. Instead of being a victim of your triggers, you become grateful for them because they show you where your work is. Instead of trying to control others' behavior to manage your own reactions, you take responsibility for healing the wounds that make you reactive in the first place. Instead of seeking relationships that never challenge you, you appreciate relationships that help you see yourself more clearly, even when it's uncomfortable. The ripple effects of your integration work extend far beyond your personal life. As you stop projecting your disowned qualities onto others, you contribute to reducing the collective shadow projections that fuel racism, sexism, homophobia, and other forms of systemic oppression. As you stop trying to control others to manage your own discomfort, you model healthy boundaries and authentic relating. As you integrate your own capacity for cruelty, you become less susceptible to manipulation by those who would use your naivety against you. Personal shadow work is political work, psychological work is spiritual work, individual healing is collective healing.